The fog rolling off the San Francisco Bay at 11 at night tasted like salt and cold exhaust. It clung to the street lamps, diffusing the yellow light into murky halos that barely illuminated the uneven pavement of the Marina District. I stood on the top step of the Victorian duplex, the night air biting through the thin cotton of my blue t-shirt. I hadn't bothered with a jacket. I had assumed this would be a 30-second interaction, a simple drop-off. In my right hand, I held a brushed steel encrypted USB drive. It belonged to Audrey Dixon. She had left it in my firm's conference room 3 hours ago, right after a grueling preliminary audit meeting. My job as a forensic accountant was usually confined to finding hidden offshore accounts or dismantling corporate fraud via ledger analysis. But when I had plugged this drive into my isolated sandbox server to check for the missing Q3 expense reports, she had promised I didn't find architectural blueprints. I found a nested folder containing a highly sophisticated staggered data leak designed to frame her for siphoning firm capital. The metadata had been manipulated. Someone was actively trying to destroy her, and the digital footprint pointed to an IP address that was currently active. Back at the office, there had already been a low, ugly current of speculation about Audrey's off-site meetings with donors, consultants, and university partners. Marcus didn't need a clean lie. He only needed something messy enough to feed what people already wanted to whisper about. I knocked twice. Firm, flat raps against the heavy oak. The deadbolt threw with a sharp metallic snap. The door cracked open just a few inches. Audrey stood in the narrow gap and the dim hallway light, catching the edge of her jaw. She was wearing a pair of silk pajamas, and the fabric printed with soft pink and green floral patterns that contrasted sharply with the tension in her wide dark eyes. One hand braced against the inside edge of the door. Her hair was down, slightly tangled, falling over one shoulder. She didn't look at my face. Her gaze darted past my shoulders, scanning the dark street, piercing through the thick fog toward the line of parked cars across the street. "Come inside before he sees you," she whispered. Her hand shot out. Her fingers gripped the fabric of my t-shirt at the bicep, her grip surprisingly strong. She pulled me through the doorway with a sudden, forceful yank. I stepped over the threshold, instinctively shifting my weight to avoid colliding with her. The heavy door slammed shut behind me. Audrey immediately threw the deadbolt, fastened the chain lock, and engaged a secondary security latch near the floor. The metallic clicks echoed in the tight space of her entryway. The sudden stillness of the apartment settled over us, blocking out the low hum of the city and the damp chill of the fog. She pressed her back against the door, exhaling a shaky breath. She closed her eyes for a fraction of a second, her hands flat against the wood. "Audrey," I said. My voice was low, deliberately kept to a calm, measured volume. Her eyes snapped open. "Did you see a dark gray sedan parked near the fire hydrant?" I accessed my visual memory of the street. I always cataloged environments. California plates, partial reed ending in 4JT. Engine was off, but the exhaust pipe was still ticking. Someone was in the driver's seat. "Marcus," she said. The name lacked any warmth. It was a statement of fact heavy with exhaustion. She pushed away from the door, wrapping her arms around her waist, the floral silk of her sleeves shifting softly. "He's been out there for an hour. He texted me that he knows I hired an independent auditor. He said if I don't sign the settlement forfeiting my shares in the firm by midnight, he's sending the file to the board." I looked down at the silver drive in my hand. "The file on this drive." She nodded, her gaze dropping to the floor. "He told me it was just the backup blueprints for the Presidio project. He insisted I give it to you today to prove transparency. I didn't know what was on it until he texted me 20 minutes ago." "It's a digital frame-up," I stated, keeping my tone entirely analytical. The drive contains a ledger of phantom transactions routed through shell LLCs that share your home address. The timestamps on the document creation were spoofed to look like they originated from your personal laptop. It's a clumsy execution, but enough to trigger a devastating internal investigation. Audrey looked up at me, the tremor in her hands finally visible. She was 8 years my senior, a woman who usually commanded boardrooms with terrifying precision. Seeing her cornered, shivering slightly, in floral pajamas in her own hallway triggered a heavy cold drop in my stomach. I kept my hands securely in the pockets of my jeans. I had a strict rule about professional distance. My job was to observe, document, and extract the truth. Emotional involvement clouded the data. But the sudden urge to step between her and the door, to physically block out whatever threat Marcus represented, was a variable I hadn't accounted for. "We have 42 minutes until midnight," I said. "I need your Wi-Fi password, a flat surface, and a pot of coffee." Audrey blinked, the panic receding slightly, replaced by a flicker of sharp intelligence. "You brought your setup." I shifted my shoulder, adjusting the strap of the heavy canvas messenger bag resting against my back. "I came straight here from a field audit in Oakland. Server images, extraction kit, backup battery, write blockers. I didn't have time to unload any of it." She led me down a short hallway into a spacious living room. It was minimalist, dominated by a massive drafting table and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the foggy bay. The blinds were drawn tight. She pointed to a solid oak dining table. My bag hit the table first, then the laptop. It was a heavy, reinforced machine built for processing massive data sets, not for aesthetics. The boot screen cast a harsh white glare across the dark wood. A secondary portable monitor came out next, expanding the workspace in front of me. "Black, no sugar," Audrey said quietly from the kitchen alcove. "Yes, thank you." I didn't watch her make the coffee. I focused on the screen. The first rule of forensic extraction is securing the chain of custody. I opened a terminal window and began logging my own keystrokes, establishing a verified timeline of my actions to prove that I was the one accessing the drive, not Audrey. I plugged the silver USB into a write-blocking adapter, a piece of hardware that ensured no data could be accidentally altered or added to the drive while I examined it. I connected the adapter to my machine. Audrey walked over, placing a ceramic mug beside my right hand. The scent of dark roast momentarily cut through the sterile smell of heated electronics. She stood next to my chair, close enough that I could hear the slight unevenness of her breathing. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Extracting the EXIF data and system logs," I said, my fingers moving rapidly across the keyboard. Spoofing a timestamp is easy. Deleting the artifact trail of that spoofing is difficult. Marcus is an architect, not a network security engineer. He left fingerprints. He's meticulous, Lincoln. He spent 6 months quietly draining the firm's reserve accounts. When I noticed the discrepancies, he realized I was going to blow the whistle. That's why he built this file, to make it look like I was the one doing it and he was the one who caught me. She crossed her arms again. I noticed her twisting a silver ring on her right index finger. 1, 2, 3 turns. A self-soothing gesture. He's meticulous with buildings. I corrected softly, never taking my eyes off the cascading lines of hex code on my left monitor. He is careless with data. I isolated the core ledger file Marcus had planted. I ran a script to strip the superficial metadata and dig into the file's raw structural history. "There," I said, pointing to a string of alphanumeric characters. "The file claims it was created on your machine on October 12th. But the system architecture tag embedded in the hex code matches a Windows OS build that your Mac doesn't run. Furthermore, the routing history shows it was compiled on a local network with an SSID named M. Dixon guessed. Audrey let out a short, sharp exhale. The sound of relief. His home network. It proves he manufactured the file. But it doesn't prove he stole the reserve funds. I have proof of that, Audrey said. Her voice was suddenly steady. She stepped away from the table, walking over to a built-in bookshelf. She reached behind a row of heavy architecture textbooks and pulled out a thick, leather-bound notebook. She returned to the table and set it down next to my laptop. "What is this?" I asked. "My own audit," she said. I didn't trust the digital ledgers. Marcus had admin access to our cloud servers. I knew he could alter the numbers. So for the last 3 months, I stayed late. I pulled the hard copy bank statements from the mailroom before he could intercept them. I manually reconciled them against our vendor invoices. Every missing dollar is tracked in here, in ink. I looked at the notebook, then up at her. The sheer volume of manual labor that represented was staggering. It was brilliant analog and entirely secure from digital manipulation. "You didn't mention this at the firm today," I said. "I couldn't," she replied, her eyes meeting mine. "He has allies on the board. I didn't know who I could trust. I didn't even know if I could trust you, Lincoln. You were hired by the firm, not by me." Her honesty was a sharp edge. It made sense. Trust was a liability in her current position. "You can trust my process," I said quietly. I reached out and opened the notebook. The columns were perfect, the handwriting precise. It was irrefutable. "This changes the battlefield." My phone lit up with a calendar reminder before I could silence it. 10:30 p.m. late coffee with Noah, the only personal plan I'd made all week. I muted the alert, typed a quick cancellation without looking away from the ledger, and set the phone face down on the table. I needed absolute focus. "We need to digitize this," I instructed. "I'm going to scan these pages using a high-fidelity capture app. I will cross-reference your analog dates with the digital routing anomalies I've found on his drive. We are going to build an impenetrable timeline. By the time midnight arrives, he won't be holding a weapon. He'll be holding a confession." Audrey pulled out the chair next to mine and sat down. The proximity shifted the gravity in the room. I could feel the warmth radiating from her arm mere inches from mine. I kept my posture rigid, leaning slightly toward the screen to maintain professional distance. For the next 2 hours, the only sounds in the apartment were the hum of the refrigerator, the rapid clicking of my keyboard, and the soft rustle of paper as Audrey turned the pages of her ledger for me to scan. When the export bar stalled at 83%, Audrey set the kettle down and glanced at the frozen screen. "Tell me that's normal." "Normal is a dangerous word in my line of work," I said. "Let's call it acceptable." A short breath escaped her, almost a laugh. The sound eased some of the pressure in the room. It was a strange, compact domesticity. We were dismantling a man's life, executing a high-stakes legal defense, yet the atmosphere was entirely hushed. When my coffee went cold, Audrey quietly took my mug, and returned with a fresh, steaming pour. She didn't interrupt my focus. She simply anticipated the need. "Done," I said at 11:45 p.m. I hit the final keystroke. The PDF compiled. It was a 40-page document combining her handwritten ledgers with my digital forensic extraction. It definitively proved that Marcus had orchestrated the embezzlement and subsequently manufactured the fake evidence against her. Audrey leaned forward, reading the executive summary I had typed on the screen. "It's bulletproof," she whispered. "It is," I agreed. "We will email this to the entire board, copying the firm's legal counsel and the local precinct's financial crimes unit. We will send it at 11:58 p.m., 2 minutes before his deadline." A sudden, sharp buzz vibrated against the wood of the table. Audrey's phone had lit up, an incoming email. The subject line read, Final warning. She opened it. The color drained entirely from her face. She dropped the phone onto the table, pushing her chair back with a harsh scraping sound. I looked at the screen. It wasn't a financial document. It was a photograph. It showed Audrey at a restaurant, seated across from a man I recognized as a competitor to her firm. They were looking at a set of blueprints. The context of the photo was clearly a standard business lunch, but the angle and the lighting made it look secretive, clandestine. Below the photo was a text message from Marcus. "I don't even need the financial files, Audrey. I send this to the board and they'll fire you for violating your non-compete clause. You're selling our designs. Sign the settlement." That was 2 years ago. Audrey said, her voice cracking. Her hands were shaking violently now. That was a lunch with a university colleague. We were discussing a charity build. It wasn't a competitor's project. But the board won't care. The optics alone could trigger a formal conflict review under my contract. He's going to ruin me anyway. The precision of my plan fractured. Marcus wasn't just relying on the financial frame-up. He had layered his leverage. He was using a lie of omission to force her hand. Audrey turned away, pressing the heels of her hands against her eyes. A quiet, stifled sound escaped her throat. The heavy armor of her competence had finally cracked under the relentless, multi-angled pressure. I stood up. I didn't think about the professional boundary. I stepped into her space. "Audrey." She didn't lower her hands. "It's over, Lincoln. He's going to win. He always finds an angle." I reached out my hand, stopping an inch from her shoulder. I hesitated, then placed my palm flat against the center of her back, right between her shoulder blades. The contact was firm grounding, entirely devoid of anything but absolute support. "He is not going to win," I said. My jaw locked. I shifted half a step closer, shoulders squared between her and the hallway, and waited until she lifted her gaze. "Look at me." She slowly lowered her hands and turned. Her eyes were bright, defensive. "A photograph is just light and pixels." I told her, my tone steady, forcing my calm into her panic. "It has metadata just like the ledger." "When did you say that lunch happened?" 2 years ago, April. "Then the EXIF data on that original image file will prove it was taken 2 years ago." I explained, keeping my hand anchored on her back until her breathing leveled out. "If he sends that to the board claiming it's a recent violation of your non-compete, he is committing documented libel. I will pull the location data, the timestamp, and the camera model from the image file he just sent." I dropped my hand and stepped back to the laptop. I forwarded her email to my secure server. I ran the extraction tool on the embedded JPEG. 10 seconds later, the data parsed on my screen. "Date taken April 14th, 2 years ago," I read aloud. "Camera model iPhone 12. GPS coordinates match a public cafe in Berkeley." I turned to look at her. "He just handed us the proof of his blackmail. I am appending this metadata analysis to our final report." The clock on my monitor shifted to 11:55 p.m. "5 minutes," I said. Before I could compile the final attachment, a loud, heavy pounding echoed from the front of the apartment. Someone was hammering a fist against the front door. "Audrey, open the door." Marcus's voice was muffled through the wood, but the hostility was unmistakable. "I know you're in there. I saw the light. You have 3 minutes." Audrey froze. The sanctuary of the quiet room was shattered. "He came up," she whispered. "He bypassed the lobby security." "Stay here," I instructed. "Lincoln, no." She grabbed my wrist. "He's unpredictable. Don't engage him." "I am not going to fight him," I said quietly, gently, untangling her fingers from my wrist. "I am going to document him." I picked up my phone, unlocked it, and opened the video recording application. I hit record. I walked down the hallway, the floorboards silent under my boots. I stopped 2 feet from the door. "Marcus Dixon," I said, my voice projecting clearly through the heavy oak. I used his full name. I was speaking for the microphone on my phone as much as for him. The pounding stopped instantly. Silence hung heavy in the hallway. "Who is that?" Marcus demanded, his voice dropping an octave. "My name is Lincoln Bryant. I am an independent forensic auditor retained by this firm," I stated calmly. "I am currently standing inside Audrey Dixon's residence. The time is 11:57 p.m. I am recording this audio. No, open the door, you arrogant piece of work." "I will not open the door," I interrupted, cutting through his volume with flat, unyielding authority. "I am informing you as a courtesy that I have completed the digital extraction of the USB drive you provided. I have recovered the spoofed network routing data confirming the ledger was manufactured on your home network." I paused, letting the silence stretch for exactly 3 seconds. Let the facts land. "Furthermore," I continued, my voice steady, "I have compiled Audrey's handwritten analog reconciliation of the firm's bank statements, which definitively tracks the missing reserve capital to your personal LLCs. Finally, I have extracted the EXIF data from the photograph you sent at 11:45 p.m., proving it was taken 2 years ago, thereby constituting documented extortion." I could hear the faint sound of him shifting his weight on the other side of the door. The aggressive energy had evaporated, replaced by the distinct, frantic silence of a man realizing his trap had just snapped shut on his own leg. "You're bluffing," he sneered, but his voice lacked conviction. At exactly 11:59 p.m. a 42-page encrypted PDF will be transmitted to the firm's board of directors, their legal counsel, and Detective Hayes at the Financial Crimes Unit, I stated. "If you remain on this property, I will add a trespassing and harassment complaint to the filing." I stood perfectly still, watching the digital timer on my phone screen tick upward. 10 seconds. 20 seconds. I heard the sound of a shoe scraping against the concrete of the exterior hallway. Then the heavy, fast thud of footsteps retreating down the stairwell. He ran. I stopped the recording. I saved the file to a secure cloud folder, locking the chain of custody. I turned around. Audrey was standing at the end of the hallway. She had heard everything. Her posture had changed entirely. The defensive tightness was gone. She stood tall, her shoulders relaxed, looking at me with an expression that made my chest tighten. It wasn't just relief. It was absolute respect. I walked back into the living room, sat down at my laptop, and hit send. "It's done," I said. "The emails are away." Audrey walked over to the table. She didn't look at the screen. She looked at me. "He's gone," she said softly. "He will be dealing with a police inquiry by morning." I confirmed. "He won't approach you again. The leverage is permanently destroyed." I began to close my applications, methodically shutting down the forensic tools. The crisis had passed. My job was technically complete. It was time for me to pack my heavy bag and walk back out into the cold fog. Audrey reached out and placed her hand flat over mine, stopping me from closing the laptop. The contact was light, but it felt like a heavy anchor dropping into the center of the room. The ambient noise of the apartment faded. I looked at her hand, tracing the shape of the silver ring she wore, then looked up into her eyes. "Don't pack up yet," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The extraction is finished, Audrey." "I know," she replied. She stepped closer, moving into the space between my chair and the table. "I'm not asking the auditor to stay." I swallowed, my throat suddenly dry. I kept my hands entirely still on the keyboard. I refused to misread the situation. I refused to take advantage of the adrenaline crash. "You are exhausted," I said carefully. "You've been under extreme psychological pressure. I should leave so you can rest." Audrey offered a small, tired smile. It was the most genuine expression I had seen on her face all night. "Lincoln, you spent the last 3 hours proving exactly how meticulous you are. Don't overthink this." She removed her hand from my keyboard and moved it to my shoulder, her fingers brushing against the cotton of my t-shirt. The touch was a stabilizer. The chaotic spinning of my own rigid internal rules slowed to a halt. "Stay," she said. It was a clear, active choice. I looked at her, dropping the professional mask entirely. "Okay." I didn't touch her. I simply nodded, accepting the boundaries she had drawn and the space she had opened. The remaining hours of the night passed in a quiet, shifting dynamic. We didn't sleep. We moved to the living room couch. I sat on one end, she sat on the other, her legs tucked under her. We talked. Not about ledgers or IP addresses, but about the exhaustion of carrying heavy burdens alone. I told her about my preference for numbers because they didn't lie. She told me about the pressure of building structures that had to look perfect from the outside. As the sky outside the window began to turn a pale, bruised purple, the distance between us on the couch had incrementally vanished. She had drifted off to sleep around 5 a.m., her head resting heavily against my shoulder. I remained perfectly still, listening to the steady rhythm of her breathing, acting as a physical shield against the remnants of the night's anxiety. At 8 a.m., my phone buzzed with an incoming call. Audrey stirred, sitting up slowly, rubbing her eyes. She looked disoriented for a fraction of a second, then her gaze locked onto me, and the tension melted from her face. The call came through at 8 a.m. I answered on the first vibration. "Bryant." "Mr. Bryant, this is Detective Hayes," a gruff voice said over the line. "I reviewed the PDF you filed at midnight. It's thorough. We picked up Marcus Dixon at his residence 20 minutes ago. He's in custody." "Understood. Thank you, Detective. I need Miss Dixon to come down to the precinct this morning to sign the formal complaint and provide a sworn statement." "We will be there in an hour," I said. I hung up and looked at Audrey. "They have him. We need to go to the precinct." She nodded, standing up. "Give me 10 minutes to change." 45 minutes later, the fog had completely burned off, revealing a sharp, bright San Francisco morning. We walked into the crowded lobby of the Financial Crimes Precinct. The air was thick with the noise of ringing phones, shouting officers, and the metallic clatter of keyboards. Detective Hayes, a tired-looking man with a graying mustache, met us at the front desk. "Ms. Dixon," he said, extending a hand. "I'm sorry for the circumstances. We have the suspect in interrogation. He's requesting legal counsel, but with the data trail your auditor provided, the DA is already drafting the indictment." He looked past her, eyeing me with professional curiosity. "You do clean work, Mr. Bryant. The chain of custody on that digital extraction saved us weeks of subpoenas." "It's my job," I said simply. "Right." Hayes nodded. He looked back at Audrey. "If you'll come with me, Ms. Dixon, we can get your statement on the record. Mr. Bryant can wait in the lobby. We only need the primary victim." Audrey stopped. She looked at Hayes, then turned and looked at me. The bustling noise of the precinct seemed to fall away. This was the moment. The threat was neutralized. The contract was technically fulfilled. She could walk into that room, reclaim her life, and I would become a footnote in a police report. A useful technician. Audrey reached out. In front of the detective, in front of the passing officers, she took my hand. Her fingers laced through mine. Her grip was firm, anchoring me to the spot. "Actually, Detective," Audrey said, her voice clear and ringing with absolute certainty, "Lincoln comes with me. He isn't just my auditor." She didn't offer a label. She didn't need to. The physical act of holding my hand in a public adversarial environment was a definitive statement. She was choosing not to walk into the aftermath alone. Hayes raised an eyebrow, looking down at our joined hands, and then nodded slowly. "Understood. Right this way, both of you." As we followed the detective down the long corridor, Audrey paused. She turned to face me, stopping our forward momentum. She looked up, her dark eyes clear and focused. "Thank you," she said softly. "I just documented the facts." I replied, deflecting out of habit. "No," Audrey corrected gently. "You stood in front of the door." She stayed close instead of stepping back. Her fingers tightened around mine once, then her free hand settled over my chest, right above my sternum. I held still. She searched my face, found no resistance there, and leaned in first. It was not a frantic collision of adrenaline. It was a destination. The kiss was gentle and certain. It landed with the same steadiness that had carried us through the night, a clear promise made under harsh fluorescent lights, nothing rushed, nothing unclear. When she pulled back, the slight tremor in her hand was completely gone. "Let's go finish this," she said. I tightened my grip on her hand. "Lead the way." By the time we walked out of the precinct, the last of the morning fog had burned off the bay. Audrey still had statements to sign, board calls to take, and a firm to rebuild. I still had reports to lock, evidence to preserve, and a very long day ahead. None of that felt uncertain anymore. Her hand stayed in mine all the way to the front steps. For the first time since I knocked on her door, the air felt clear. Please like and subscribe so we can share more stories like this.